the Black working class is a group that we rarely, if ever, actually talk about, hear about, think about, maybe see, exactly. But to be clear, we want you guys to know the working class is typically anyone working with less than a bachelor's degree. That's kind of the definition that everyone can kind of agree on. But as America becomes more diverse, this group will also rise, the Black working class. So here are some stats for you. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the United States will be majority minority by 2043. And the working class of the country will be majority minority by 2032. So that will change before the country changes.
Very soon.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. So this afternoon, I sat down with Dr. Robert Patterson. He's the chair of the African American Studies Department at Georgetown University. We talked about what kind of jobs make up the Black working class, what issues they're facing, and probably more importantly, what keeps us, the collective us, from talking about class and race at the same time.
Something that we don't talk about is the Black working class.
Right.
Who are they?
Right. The invisibility or the making the Black working class invisible is a part of how institutional racism particularly works. And so when we think about the Black working class, I think that we can think about that in several different ways. We can think about hourly workers, we can think about wage workers, but we can also think about the ways that some jobs that used to be hourly are made salaried as a way to also compress wages. And so we can think about typically service industries, we could think about blue collar work as being a part of the working class. But there's a way that wages are not keeping up with inflation, so that people who are ostensibly, managerial classes that people might think as being, middle class or the upper part of the working class are being pushed into the working class. Black people are disproportionately represented among blue collar jobs, as is the case where they're disproportionately represented among the service sector, right? And that this phenomenon has historical roots of what jobs Black people had accessible to them, but it also has the residual effects of employment trends.
What are the issues that are facing the Black working class
Right.
today? Because we know, we talk about wage stagnation
Right.
for everyone, but that's hitting the Black working class especially hard.
So wages may be compressed for everyone, but the effect that then has on people whose wages were already compressed becomes disproportionate. So in addition to stagnant wages, right? So you have stagnant wages which have to be considered alongside the fact that the cost of living is increasing. And so the wages in that case are not actually stagnant, but they're decreasing in terms of what the material effects of those wages are.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to have a conversation
Right.
about wage inequality, about the working class,
Right.
and with the lens of race being attached to it?
So one of the broader phenomena that occurs when we talk about class has to do with the unwillingness and or perhaps inability to talk about race and the history of racism, the history of sexism, how they move through each other in the United States and what those effects have been. And so if you think about the civil rights movement and these moves for more equality, and you think about what immediately happens after that, this movement into color blindness, right? Which is this interesting perversion of what the civil rights movement is about in terms of achieving equality. But when you think about the effects that has about conversations about race and equality, one of the impacts is to ignore race and to try to propose that class trumps race when we know that they're operating through each other. I would submit that we need to have, instead of color blindness, we should have not only color mindfulness, but color specific policies, right? And so in what specific ways are we able to help the Black working class, the Black, well, I was going to say middle class, but any groups that have been historically and presently discriminated against? Because the reality is that seemingly benign and fair systems are built on principles that take into account, right, race, class, gender, sexuality, and so forth, but also that the people who are in the positions to make those decisions are informed by these histories that see Black workers, for example, and may make presumptions about their availability, their reliability, right? They make assumptions about the quality of worker that they're going to get that's based on how that person presents and then judged accordingly.
We continue to see, I think, a lack of people wanting to have that conversation,
Right.
a lot of pushback on peace, on being politically correct,
Right.
social justice warriors and all of that stuff, as if that people don't want to have that conversation or don't find it helpful.
If people believe that there's a limited set of resources that are fleeting and that only so many people can have access to them, then part of how you keep groups pitted against each other is by pitting them against each other, right? And so you're fighting for resources, and it won't be enough, and then you have these other people who shouldn't be entitled to them or deserving of them, and so you feel that philosophy as well. But I could imagine the utility of one sitting with Congress and saying, okay, you think that this policy, you're trying to be fair, right? So you presumably have a policy that you think is fair. Well, can we shift the conversation from fairness to equity, right? Because we can produce inequity by being fair, because fairness presumes there's the same starting point. So we have to acknowledge that there's not the same starting point, and then in order for us to achieve equity, we would then have to give different levels of support, different access, different tools in order to achieve equity. And that's really what the conversation has to move towards models of equity that recognize that you may have to be unfair if you think that equity is a part of what social justice is.
Do you think that as the browning of both America and also the working class, do you think as that happens, more policies directed at those groups will happen? Because if there's more of them, you think that they'd have a larger voice, you think that there'd be more of them in the room when those conversations are happening?
Even if we do have these policies that are geared toward the working class, more broadly speaking, the people of color will be disproportionately affected and impacted by them, which will continue to retool that conversation, right? Because they're disproportionately represented among them, which means that the impact will be related to that too. And so the fact that race, class, gender specific policies probably need to be enacted, that will make people very uneasy. That will make politicians very uneasy, because the minute I say I'm going to do that, the ad against me will be on television before I know it. And so now my desire to actually affect the change may be undermined because I may be voted out of the position to be able to make that change.
Dr. Patterson, I asked him, I said, are you hopeful that this is first a conversation that we can have, and then is it something that we can change? And he is. He says there are a lot of people doing the work, and he thinks despite the vitriol that America has right now, that at some point we'll bounce back.
All right, some good insights. Thank you so much.